So, for today's movie review, I'll be reviewing Jurassic World, Fallen Kingdom. Or Jurassic Park 5, if you really wanted to get technical about it, but anywho. The movie is directed by Spanish film director J.A. Bayona, who was known for directing 3 other movies before this, with his directorial debut with the 2007 Spanish horror movie, The Orphanage. His second movie being the 2012 disaster movie, The Impossible, and with his third movie being the 2016 dark fantasy movie, A Monster Calls. So in some cases, there was some hype behind it because of a combination of the person directing the movie, along with the fact that this is the 5th installment of the Jurassic Park franchise. Because back in 2015, Jurassic World was a pleasant surprise for movie-going audiences. I mean, the movie for the longest time was the highest-grossing movie of that year until Star Wars The Force Awakens came out, but even then, it was the second highest grossing movie of the year. To put that in perspective, Jurassic World made more money than Avengers Age of Ultron, a highly anticipated Marvel movie of that year. Which is really impressive, because the last time we had a Jurassic Park movie was back in 2001 with the release of Jurassic Park 3, which at the time was the 8th highest grossing movie of 2001. So the fact that Jurassic World was a 4th installment managed to become the 2nd highest grossing movie of the year is impressive. Like, I still remember my movie-going experience seeing Jurassic World because I went to go see one of the 2D showings for it, and sure enough, when I went to go get my ticket for the 2D showing, it was sold out. Which really surprised me, because I wasn't really expecting the movie to do that well. So I went to go see one of the later showings that happened to be a 3D showing, and sure enough, when I sat down at the theater, it was a packed theater. Like, I literally have not seen a movie theater that packed in a long time. But anywho, and because of this, producers over at Universal Studios decided to greenlight 2 more sequels, one of them being the subject for today's review. Which leads us into our question: is Jurassic World Fallen Kingdom a good follow-up to Jurassic World? As for the plot of Jurassic World Fallen Kingdom, set several years after the events of Jurassic World, with the park now closed, Owen and Claire, along with a group of dinosaur activists, return to Isla Nublar to save the dinosaurs, when they learn that a once dormant volcano is on the verge of eruption. As Owen, Claire, and several members of the dinosaur activist group attempt to rescue the dinosaurs on Isla Nublar, a conspiracy revolved around one of the surviving velociraptors named Blue soon takes form that could potentially disrupt the natural order of the entire planet. Can Owen, Claire, and their allies get to the bottom of this conspiracy, or will mankind create its own extinction-level event? In terms of what I liked about the movie, I'm going to talk about the special effects first, because when Jurassic World was first announced, there were several news outlets that stated that the movie was going to bring back animatronics, which really excited me because every movie between the 3rd Jurassic Park movie and Jurassic World started to ditch practical effects in favor of more CGI effects. And on top of that, the Jurassic Park movies have always been practical effect heavy with some mixture of CGI. And when Jurassic World did come out, even though I still like the movie very much, my biggest disappointment with the movie was the fact that it didn't have enough practical effects. Because as I sat there watching the movie, there were several points in time where I was like, that could have been a practical effect, that could have been a practical effect, that could have been a practical effect, and that could have been a practical effect. Like, I think out of all the special effects in the movie, there was maybe like one scene that featured an actual practical effect. Beyond that, everything else was CGI. And there's even points in time where I think the movie does use some practical effects, but they cover it in CGI that looks really bad. And as far as the special effects for this movie, even though the movie is CGI heavy, I think that the CGI done on the dinosaurs looks 20 times better than how it was featured in Jurassic World. Because even though I think the CGI in the movie looks pretty good, I think they could have spent some more time adding more details to some dinosaurs. It didn't look quite fully rendered in some cases, whereas the dinosaurs in this movie look really good. Like, this is perhaps the one Jurassic Park movie to feature the best CGI dinosaurs since the original Jurassic Park movie. Granted, I think there's like maybe 1 or 2 dinosaurs that don't quite look fully rendered, but all the other dinosaurs look fantastic. And as far as the practical effects go for this movie, I did really like the fact that this movie at least has physical practical effects as opposed to Jurassic World, which only had the one practical effect. Granted, the practical effects themselves don't look as great as the Stan Winston animatronics from the first Jurassic Park movie, but I appreciate the fact that the filmmakers did go out of their way to include actual physical animatronic dinosaurs. Hell, the movie even does the whole, we have a practical effect, but we covered it in CGI. But here's the thing, when they did that in Jurassic World, like I said, it looked terrible. But when they do it here, they blend both the actual animatronic with the CGI so well that you can't tell what's the actual practical effect versus what is CGI. The two elements are just that well blended together. Another thing that I liked about the movie was the fact that the movie lived up to its title. Because the biggest complaint that a lot of people had with Jurassic World was the fact that, despite the movie being called Jurassic World, the dinosaurs were only contained to Isla Nublar, not the rest of the world. Granted, I knew what the movie title was going for in that sense of Jurassic World is what the park is called, in the same vein as something like SeaWorld. But anywho, with Jurassic World Fallen Kingdom, it does indeed live up to its title because one, Isla Nublar is destroyed by a volcano, thus the kingdom has fallen, and by the time the movie comes to an end, dinosaurs have been unleashed upon the world. Spoiler if you haven't seen the movie. Thus, mankind now has to learn to live with the dinosaurs, thus creating a Jurassic World, if it were. And because of how the movie ends, it has me interested in the sequel in terms of what direction they'll go in, and seeing how the ending of this movie affects the next installment. And as far as the pacing of the movie goes, it's a bit of a mixed bag in some cases, because on one hand, the first 15 to 20 minutes is a tad bit slow in that sense of it's establishing what the situation is, re-establishing old characters from the previous movie and introducing new characters. And when we do get to the island, the pacing to the movie is very brisk and fast paced, but when we get to the mainland in the second half of the movie, it's slow, but once the action gets going, the action picks up again. And despite the pacing in this movie being all over the place, normally when I talk about the pacing to the movie being uneven, normally that's a negative aspect, but for this movie, I think it works. Because on one hand, you do need those slower paced scenes for the atmosphere and characters to really digest what is about to happen or what did happen, and have the action scenes be more fast paced oriented. I also kind of like how the movie goes in a new direction in terms of its thematics, because with the first Jurassic Park movie, it was all about how mankind messes with nature, which leads to chaos. With Lost World Jurassic Park, life finds a way. With the third Jurassic Park movie, I actually don't think it had any thematics because none were thought of at the time. With Jurassic World, it's a good example of a piece of metafiction in terms of how can both the story and the franchise stay relevant and reinvent itself, in which it did. And with this movie, it focuses on the themes of animal abuse, because it introduces this group of poacher characters where we see them either stealing teeth from dinosaurs that are still alive, to seeing them trying to corral the dinosaurs into their new cages on the mainland by shocking them repeatedly. I also like the overall tone that the movie has going for it, or in this case, tones, because normally I would make it the complaint that the movie should have stuck with one tone as opposed to having multiple, but I think for this movie it actually works, because the first half of the movie tonally is very reminiscent of that of a 1960s dinosaur action-adventure B-movie, where we do have people getting chased by dinosaurs. There is a lot of corny and campy moments, but they're done the best ways possible. And as for the second half of the movie in regards to its tone, it's very reminiscent to that of a horror movie in that sense of we're set in this gothic mansion. There's a lot of unpleasant and creepy moments where it feels kind of reminiscent of that of Alien, where the first half of it is very science fiction heavy, but once the xenomorph, or in this case the Indoraptor, enters the picture, it becomes more of a horror movie in the best ways possible. And speaking of the second half of the movie, when I was watching reviews for this movie, everyone always said they liked the first half of the movie, but hated the second half because it felt way too derivative of that of a horror movie. And I really don't understand why. Because on one hand, as much as I like the first half of the movie where they're being chased by dinosaurs on the island there, let's be honest, we have 4 other Jurassic Park movies in which feature people being chased by dinosaurs on a tropical island setting. Hell, every dinosaur movie in in general is typically set on a tropical island of sorts with or without an erupting volcano, which I find to be really confusing because when it comes to sequels to popular movies, a lot of complaints are the fact that the sequel is just a retread of the first movie. And yet, here's a movie where the second half of the movie is completely different from anything we've seen in the previous installments of the Jurassic Park franchise, yet everyone's like, oh no, we like the first half of the movie, even though it's just a retread of Lost World Jurassic Park. It's just done slightly better with an erupting volcano. Yet with the second half of the movie, it does something new by being a horror movie. Because on one hand, yes, we do have the cast of main characters being chased by yet another hybrid dinosaur, but it's no longer set on some tropical island for the umpteenth time. Instead, the main cast of characters are trapped within the confines of this beautiful Gothic mansion, which I think is a really neat idea for a movie involving dinosaurs. And another gripe that people had with the second half of the movie was the fact that I think a lot of people were expecting the climax or the last 20 minutes to be reminiscent of that of the last 20 minutes to The Lost World, where we see every single dinosaur going on a rampage in a nearby town. But the way I see things, I feel that if they were to have a climax like that, I think it would be just a bit too overcrowded. Hence why we're getting another installment to the franchise. Second, there's going to be another installment to this franchise focusing on that idea. Third, with the way the second half of this movie is set up, it's meant to serve as baby steps to the installment that comes after this, which I think was a smart move on the director's part. I also like the variety of dinosaurs and other prehistoric creatures that appear in this movie, because I think out of any Jurassic Park movie or any dinosaur movie in general, this has the biggest variety of dinosaurs, including new dinosaurs from the Sinoceratops, the Stegimoloch, which has a surprisingly significant role in the second half of the movie, the Allosaurus, along with two fan-favorite theropod dinosaurs that fans have been begging to see in a Jurassic Park movie since the first movie, those being the Carnotaurus and the Baryonyx. Because with something like the Carnotaurus, this was a theropod dinosaur that first appeared in the Lost World Jurassic Park book, which was known to have the ability to camouflage with its surroundings, which was referenced in the previous movie where we see the Indominus Rex showing its ability to camouflage. And outside of the movie, it is also said that the Indominus Rex is also part Carnotaurus. Whether or not this was meant to be a Easter egg to the second book is unknown, but anywho. And as for the Baryonyx at one point was originally meant to be the main villain of Jurassic Park 3, even to a point where if you look at some of the early logo designs for Jurassic Park 3, there is indeed a logo design that features the Baryonyx. But after doing some research and coming to the conclusion that the Baryonyx would have been too small of a threat for our main heroes to encounter in that movie, the film crew at the time decided to replace the Baryonyx with its bigger and more well-known cousin, the Spinosaurus, since the two of them are in the same family. Hence why the Baryonyx looks like a smaller version of the Spinosaurus, just without the sail. So in short, I like the overall variety of dinosaurs that appear in this movie, even including the likes of two dinosaurs that either appeared outside of the movie or meant to appear at one point in one of the movies, but didn't. And as for the last thing that I liked about the movie, normally when a movie sequel has callbacks to the first installment of the franchise, they're usually a hit and miss case with me, and this movie definitely has some callbacks that I'll talk about later. But there is one callback that I actually did like, because like I said earlier about how the movie finally lives up to its title, the callback in question I think serves as a nice bookend to Isla Nublar in terms of how we first saw it. Thus, I do suspect that when I go watch the first Jurassic Park movie, I will have a different emotional reaction to seeing that scene, knowing what's going to happen later in the franchise. So before I go into the actual problems I have with the movie, I do have a nitpick here and there to address first. The first nitpick being a moment that doesn't last very long, but when it does happen, I was like, really, movie? That's pushing it a bit. The scene in question is, there is a point in time where one of the dinosaurs is seen shedding a tear, and I just thought the scene in question was really unnecessary and stupid, only because the dinosaur itself is already scared and in pain, and we the audience see that it's scared and in pain, so the whole shedding the tear felt very unnecessary. But it only lasts a few seconds. as for my second nitpick of the movie, it has to do with the way Claire and Owen's relationship starts out, because in Jurassic World, it's established near the beginning of the movie that Claire and Owen used to date. But then by the time the movie comes to an end, it's implied that the two of them are getting back together. Yet, the way this movie starts off, the two of them separate for a little bit, but by the time the movie comes to an end, they get back together again. Basically, it's repeating the same thing that they did in the previous movie. Although they do add some stuff to it, I just didn't like the way it started out. In terms of what I disliked about the movie, I feel like this movie is starting to retread a lot of elements from the previous movies, especially with the way how the story progresses. Because between Lost World, Jurassic Park, and this movie, I swear to God, characters do stupid things that make no logical sense in order to advance the story. Nothing more, nothing less. Like, the one example that comes to mind the most is more near the end of the movie, where you have the lead poacher that's played by, I forget the actor's name, but it's the same actor that played Captain Leon Stottlemyre from the Monk TV show. And his spiel is collecting different dinosaur teeth to make a necklace out of it. And he comes across the Indoraptor in its cage, and he's just like, I don't remember coming across any of your kind on the island, and proceeds to shoot us some tranquilizer darts, and then he opens up the cage, goes inside, and he's under the impression that the thing is knocked out by the tranquilizer darts. But as the scene progresses, it turns out that the Indoraptor was pretending to be knocked out, and moments later proceeds to eat the poacher, leading to the Indoraptor's escape. And continuing off this moment, right before the Indoraptor proceeds to eat the poacher, the Indoraptor, for a brief second, opens up one of its eyes and gives a evil smirk towards the camera. Like, it's only for a couple seconds, but as I sat there watching it, I was just kind of perplexed by the scene. Because on one hand, I think the director was trying to make the scene creepier and establish the type of personality that the Indoraptor has, but the scene comes off as less creepy and more unintentionally funny. And there are a few scenes throughout the movie that Owen does that I find to be bullshit. One of them being him escaping the T-Rex cage, where he barely makes it out there by jumping through the T-Rex's jaws as they close. And the second one being on the island as it's blowing up. At one point, his character gets knocked out with a tranquilizer dart, so his body is slowly starting to wake up, but it's still numb because of the tranquilizer dart. Meanwhile, hot lava is slowly making its way towards him, and at this moment, he's basically doing his best, while still under the influence of the drug, to move out of the path of the magma. And as I sat there watching, I'm like, this does not seem like something Chris Pratt's character in the previous movie would do. If anything, this feels more like what Star-Lord would do in a Marvel movie as opposed to what Owen Grady did in the previous Jurassic Park movie. Also, his body got pretty close to the hot magma to a point where it should have been on fire, but I feel like the only reason why he didn't catch on fire was because of character plot armor. Nothing more, nothing less. Grant, some of the other main characters like Claire and Franklin also have moments where they apparently have plot armor, but you get my point. And speaking of Franklin, dear God, this perhaps has to be the most annoying character, not just within the Jurassic Park franchise, just with any movie in general. Because this character is just super paranoid throughout the whole movie, where he's just like, I don't like flying, or wait, did you hear that? Was that a T-Rex? And then when he screams, it's this high-pitched, annoying scream. Like, do you get an idea of how bad it is? Do you remember what Sam Witwicky from the Transformer movie sounded like when he was constantly screaming? It's like that, but worse. And as far as Franklin's character goes, I'm wondering why he's even in the movie. Because it almost feels like there was a point in time where Lolly Clothers, the computer tech guy from the previous movie who was wearing the Jurassic Park t-shirt, was meant to be a major part of this movie, but for some reason, maybe the actor playing Lolly Clothers didn't want to reprise the role, or the actor's schedule conflicted with the filming schedule of this movie. Whatever the case, I feel like the character of Franklin at one point in time was meant to be Lolly Clothers. In some cases, I wish it were. Another gripe I have with the movie is the fact that this movie does some callbacks to the first Jurassic Park movie, movie, which I thought was really unnecessary since Jurassic World already covered a good majority of the callbacks from Jurassic Park. And when that movie did it, to me, I thought it was acceptable since that was the first new Jurassic Park movie since 2001. And the way they utilized the callbacks were handled in their own unique way that made sense within the context of the movie. But when this movie does it, it feels lazy and uninspired. Granted, there is one callback they do in this movie that's actually really good, which I'm okay with, but every other callback throughout the whole movie was unnecessary. Then you have the last 15 minutes of the movie, which I seem to have a couple problems with, because everything that takes place within the mansion where you have Owen, Claire, and Maisie getting chased by the Indoraptor, I thought was great. It's just the climax with the Indoraptor where you have Owen, Maisie, Claire, and Blue, the Velociraptor, battling the Indoraptor felt very anticlimactic. Granted, trying to make a climax be just as good or bigger than the climax from Jurassic World where you have the T-Rex and Blue the Velociraptor tag teaming the Indominus Rex is gonna be a tough act to follow, because that was an epic climax. With the climax to this movie, on the other hand, it wasn't as thrilling or exciting, it was just kinda dull, and didn't really leave as big of an impact as the climax from Jurassic World. And then at one point in the movie, near the end, there's a plot twist revolved around Maisie Lockwood, which I will not reveal here, but all I have to say about it is that it's a pretty good concept that ties in with the overall themes of the Jurassic Park franchise, and could have a good moral dilemma for some of the characters. Keyword could. I say this only because there are some great ideas revolved around the plot twist, it's just they could have been handled better. Because as it is, once the plot twist is revealed, both the movie and the characters never bring it up again. Who knows, maybe it'll be addressed in the next movie, but as I said earlier, it's never addressed again for the remainder of the movie. Also, the ending itself didn't really sit well with me, because it didn't really feel like a proper ending. Because on one hand, I get what the movie was trying to do and have the movie end on a cliffhanger, but something about its execution just didn't really gel well together. Also, on top of that, this is really the only Jurassic Park movie that has this kind of ending, because when you watch all the other Jurassic Park movies up to this point, they all have proper endings. Like, you do have your climax, and it does have its falling action, and it does have an ending. Hell, even Jurassic Park 3, as anticlimactic as it is, it still had a proper ending to it. With this movie, on the other hand, on top of having an anticlimax, the ending itself felt very rushed. And instead of trying to wrap things up nicely, instead it basically went, oh yeah, by the way, we're setting up a sequel here. And because of that, I think that Jurassic World Fallen Kingdom has perhaps the worst ending to any of the Jurassic Park movies, because on top of having an anticlimax, the movie doesn't even end on a proper note, which is quite a real shame because I like the idea behind the ending of this movie. Then there are some scenes that occur in the movie that don't really fit with the movie, in that sense of these scenes didn't feel like they were made for the movie. They felt like they were made for the trailer. For example, if you saw the first trailer to Jurassic World Fallen Kingdom, the one scene where you have Owen about to be attacked by the Carnotaurus, and then have the T-Rex come in and attack the Carnotaurus, and then have that wide shot of Owen looking up at the T-Rex as it's standing over its prey, as it gives one roar with the volcano erupting in the background. It just feels like it was just made for that trailer, because when it occurs in the movie, it just doesn't make any sense. Because on one hand, you have a volcano erupting in the background and have all the dinosaurs running away from it, yet the T-Rex finds time to find another dinosaur, attack it, and then just leave. It's never mentioned or brought up again for the remainder of the movie. There are a few other scenes that are like that too, but I'm not going to talk about all of them. I'm just going to stick with the one example with the T-Rex. Another problem that I have with the movie are the villains, or specifically the human villains, because in the first half of the movie, you don't really suspect that these characters are villains at first, and they actually act like normal people, and have a sort of sophistication to them. Yet by the time the second half of the movie comes around, they act like cartoon characters, which doesn't really work well for the second half of the movie, because on top of the second half of the movie being more like a horror movie set within a mansion, it's also got these themes of animal abuse, yet having characters that act like cartoons with really serious subject matter just doesn't flow together. Like, it'd be one thing if Sam Raimi was directing this movie, then I think having cartoonish elements interaction with some horror elements could work, but that's not the case with this particular cast of villains and setting. So for my final verdict of Jurassic World Fallen Kingdom, for a movie that I had very little expectations for, it was better than I expected it to be. Granted, it's not high art by any means, because if you go into the movie expecting Shakespeare with dinosaurs, you'll be disappointed. However, if you go into this movie expecting a B-movie romp with people getting chased by dinosaurs, it'll do the job. And as far as a installment of the Jurassic Park franchise goes, as of this review, I put the movie smack dab right in the middle. It's better than Lost World and Jurassic Park 3, but it's not as good as Jurassic Park or Jurassic World. So, overall, Jurassic World Fallen Kingdom is a 1960s, 1970s styled dinosaur B-movie set in the 21st century. And before I give my final rating, what did everyone else have to say about Jurassic World Fallen Kingdom? Looks like the movie got generally mixed reception. Personally, I'm not really sure what people were expecting out of this movie, but for my final rating of Jurassic World Fallen Kingdom, I give it a 3.5 out of 5. So, what is your favorite dinosaur-themed movie that is not a part of the Jurassic Park franchise? And see you later.